Normative Islam is defined as traditional Islam, which there are elements that make up Normative Islam. Those are the Quran, the Hadith. The Sunnah also are, and the Hadith is essentially interchangeable. The jurists, of which there are 4 traditional jurists in Sunni Islam, and then the consensus of the people, also known as the Ummah. The role of the jurists is still established today through a council of religious clergy known as the ulama. So the ideology of Islamic-based terrorist groups is defined by a breakaway from normative Islam. So they are rejecting everything about traditional Islam and reverting back to what they call the golden age, the first 40 years, also known as the Salaf, which is why typically they are referred to as Salafists. So that first 40 years was before the era of the jurists. And that ideology rejects all of normative Islam. And basically, they are able to interpret the Quran and the Hadith in whatever way that suits that goal, which is essentially for power. The ideology behind jihadi Salafists, which specifically mentioning jihadi Salafists, because there are 3 versions of Salafism. There is what's known as quietist Salafism, political Salafism, and then jihadi Salafism. And quietist Salafism, the names are very appropriate. They're very peaceful. Think people just studying the Quran all day long, trying to understand the meaning within it. And usually it's more of almost a personal interpretation, although some of them become rather pronounced as scholars. And then political Islam is typically those groups that try to join in with elections in order to gain political office. The Muslim Brotherhood is a perfect example of this. And that's the recent Muslim Brotherhood, really, since the 1960s, 70s. And then the jihadi Salafism are those, obviously, that are embracing terrorism, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, perfect examples. So what these jihadi Salafist groups use is their ideology to recruit. And basically, they understand that there are many Muslims that don't fully understand what normative Islam means. They don't understand the traditions behind it. So by able to use Quranic verses or able to use hadiths out of context, they're able to create a recruiting pool of those that don't really understand their faith and aren't really given the opportunity to understand and explore it, because they're being fed a propaganda that is very specific to this jihadi Salafist ideology. Which again, if it's rejecting things, they can easily point to, well, normative Islam is based on man. We are referring to very specific ideology that's saying we're rejecting that and only focusing on the Quran and the Prophet. So it's a very powerful recruitment tool. And truly the counterterrorism strategy behind it becomes much more of an educational program to understand what normative Islam really means, and how do we find and organize and support those groups and organizations that are willing to really embrace their own faith in order to combat this recruitment ideology that's being used by groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. If you want to learn more about normative Islam and the ideology behind terrorist groups, you can do so through our undergraduate, master's, and doctoral programs in intelligence by visiting us online.